we deliver sort of water safety and first aid training workshops for school and youth groups throughout the southwest of Cornwall. And I feel very privileged that those guys have asked me to actually run some of these workshops online. They would normally be run, as I say, in schools and stuff. And this is the first one. So this is the one on tides. And next week we've got one all about rips and waves as well. What I'm going to do is, in a minute, I'm going to share my a PowerPoint slide with you. Hopefully you can appreciate that with 100 people, it's quite difficult to make it really interactive. So I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit didactic. I do have an interactive session at the end of this. And if you happen to have Kahoot, I'll talk about that a little later on, you can play along and everybody can take part in a little quiz at the end. Okay. If anybody has any questions, probably the best thing to do, given the number of people, is just to pop them in the comment box at the bottom. Now, I'm a bloke, so I'm not very good at multitasking. So it may be I might not get to your question until we get to kind of towards the end of it. But when we get to the edge, I'll have a look through the questions at that point. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen with the PowerPoint. Could a couple of people give me a thumbs up if they can see it? Great, thank you. Okay, so today's session is all about tides. We've got 4 aims of today's session, really. One is to have an understanding of what causes the tide. So the session today is aimed at it's pretty open, really. It's not aimed at specifically at kids. It's not specifically aimed at people doing A-levels or anything like that. It's just sort of general knowledge. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of something in there for everybody. So there's an understanding of the causes of tides, an understanding of different types of tides, because not all tides are equal. I'm just going to set my stopwatch here. And an understanding of there's 2 main kind of tidal movements to get your head around, and we're going to learn a little bit about them and how they might affect you if you're either at the beach or along the coastline. And finally, where you can find out information about tides and also other information about how to stay safe whenever you go into the coast. And really excited that maybe some of the lockdown restrictions are going to be lifted a little bit, and I appreciate that there's going to be a lot more people probably coming to the beach. I'm very fortunate. I live in a little village called Portreath on the north coast of Cornwall, and we've got beautiful beaches along here, and I'm hoping that we'll have lots of people coming in, more people coming in enjoying those beaches now. I guess the one thing to keep in mind is that there's no lifeguards on the beach yet, but I understand that there may be, they might be starting patrols next week again. Okay, so why do we want to understand about the tide? Well, these images that I have on the board here, so I'm just admitting other people who are coming in, are all tidal. So this amazing image of the kayaker, that wave is created simply by the tide. If we go on to the next one, the tide can affect us in lots of different ways, and we can use the tide when we go to the coast to our advantage. For instance, if we want to go and do some rock pulling, there's no point in doing rock pulling if it's high tide, but if we have a low tide, then we can go and explore those rock pulls, and we might be able to access areas of the coast that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. But they can cause problems as well. For instance, people getting cut off by the tide, maybe not knowing how it works and how it might affect us. This is an image of a place off of Pembrokeshire, it's a reef off Ramsey Island, and this is Ramsey Sound. And this is the tide that comes through this sound, which is amazing. The tide coming out of the Severn along the south coast of Wales and around this headland into Ramsey Sound. And this average is at 7 knots speed. So the tide going through there is, I don't know, that's about 11 miles an hour, something like that, which is incredible. So the tide is very, very powerful. Again, it can We can access areas at low tide which are not accessible at high tide. So we just need to be careful about that. So the first question is, what causes tide? So the tide is caused by the sun and by the moon, and to a lesser extent by the sun. Now I have some very advanced props here to help with this, which hopefully you can see. This is the Earth. You can tell it's the Earth because it says so on the front. This represents the sun, and you can tell it's the sun because it says so on the front. I'm hoping this is going to work.
You decide, but you just behave yourself.
Okay, and this is, I think I just need to.
I heard you might come to your senses. You are making.
Hang on just a second there, folks.
You've got two choices.
There's a little bit of background noise there. Sorry, I'm just going to mute everybody. Sorry, if you just bear with me a second. Okay, I think that's it. Sorry about that, folks. Go back onto it. Okay, so we have the sun and we have the moon, and this here represents, we have the sun and we have the earth, and this here represents the moon. Now, people say the moon is made of cheese. Actually, it's made of sugar, which is really, really good because it tastes really, really nice, and we can have that later on. But effectively, if you think about the earth, the only part of the earth that's movable is the water, and the moon, which is quite close to the earth, is like a big magnet. So the moon will pull the water towards it. Now the sun is like a massive big magnet, but it's actually it's quite far away. It's all the way over here, so it has less of an effect on the water. But if we think about the moon is pulling the water towards it, and the string represents the water, if you like. So whenever the moon, which is like a big magnet, pulls on the earth, it pulls all of the water towards it. And as the moon goes around the earth, it pulls the water all the way around the earth. Now, in addition to that, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when the moon, which is here, pulls the water to this side, we also have another action which is on the other side of the earth. So if you can imagine, if you were stood on this side of the earth, the water would be really deep. It would be high tide. But actually, if you were stood on this part of the earth, the water would be really, really low. So it would be low tide. So what we have is the moon pulling the water towards it, and that has an opposite reaction on the other side as well. So it's deep water on this side, and it's shallow water on this side. And so the tide is caused by the effect of the moon, and to a lesser extent, the sun. Now, when we look at this on the diagram here on the screen, you can see that if the moon is on this side, and we also we have the sun on this side, and we have the moon on this side, the gravitational force is greater because they're both together. So if you imagine that you have the sun here, the moon here, and the earth here, is creating a really big force on the earth. And so it's causing the water to be dragged a long way there. Now, 2 weeks later, actually, the moon is on the other side, relatively, but they're still all in alignment. So that means we get really big tides. But So if we have the moon, the earth, and the sun all in alignment, we have really big tides. We also, on this end, have really low tides. So we have a really high tide and a really low tide. But we also have another type of tide, which is called a neap tide. So that's a spring tide. And a neap tide is when they are at right angles to one another. So now we have the moon pulling the water up this way, and the sun is pulling it out this way. So the tide doesn't come up as much and it doesn't go out as much. And our month, our calendar is all based around this principle. So let's see if I can set this up. I could do with another pair of hands if somebody could help me. So when we have the sun, the earth and the moon all in alignment, this is a spring tide. But when we have the moon at right angles, this is a neap tide. This is 1 week later. And then 1 week later again, we have a spring tide. And then 1 week later again, we have a neap tide. You can't see it because it's behind the earth. So a month is made up of 2 spring tides and 2 neap tides. So twice a month, you have a really high tide and a very low tide. And you also have 2 neap tides, which is a very low high tide and a very high low tide. So a neap tide is a high low and a low high, and a spring tide is a high and a low. And if you can understand that, you're amazing. Okay. In addition to that, the tide, so within a month, if you go to the beach today, for instance, we're just coming off spring tides. The tides have been quite big this last few days, and they're getting smaller and smaller because we're moving towards a neap tide. But in addition to that, the quantity, the size of the spring tide changes throughout the year. So sometimes we have really big spring tides and sometimes we have lower spring tides. And the reason for that is that during the year, it takes 365 days for the, it's upside down, for the earth to go right around the sun. And remember that as it does that, as it's doing that, the moon is going around the earth like this, but they don't go in a perfect circle. They actually go, they get wide away from the earth, from the sun, and then they come in closer to the sun, and it goes wide away and then closer to the sun. So if you think about the analogy of the sun and the moon being like a big magnet, twice a year you have massive tides, and these are called equinox tides. So these are the biggest tides of the year. And as an example, so it happens around about 20th of March and 23rd-ish of September, and they're when we have the biggest tides of the year. And when that happens, there's some amazing things that go on around the UK. This is a picture of the Severn Bore, and there's so much tide during equinox that it creates this wave that goes up the River Severn, and people can catch this wave and they can surf it. And in the UK, we have the record for the world's longest ever time surfing, and that was completed on the Severn Bore because of this, these big spring tides. Okay, I was out on my daily exercise yesterday. I was walking the dog and went down to our local beach and took a couple of pictures. So this is my morning walk, and it was at 8 o'clock, about 7:30 yesterday morning. That is this picture on the left, and you can see this is the tide this morning at 7:30. I then went for a walk later on mid-afternoon, and you can see this is a picture I took in the afternoon. And so you can see there's a massive difference in that location from high tide to low tide. And I have to say, this wasn't even high tide. This was about an hour and a half after high tide, and this wasn't quite low tide. So that it can have quite a big effect on where we're going to. And there's a specific name that we use for the tide. So when the tide is coming in, we call that a flood tide. It's like it's flooding up the beach. And when it's going out, it's called an ebb tide. So we have a flood tide is the tide coming in, and an ebb tide is the tide going out. So how does it affect whenever we go to the beach? This is an amazing picture. This is one of the students from the sports science course at UK College, and we were coast-steering in UK. We came across this beautiful tuna. Unfortunately, had been washed up, massive spring tides, and it must have got caught somehow in around the rocks. But I'm not a marine biologist, so I'm afraid I can't answer many questions about that. There's two main ways of thinking about the tide, or two main tidal movements that we need to be aware of. One is tidal range, and the other is tidal flow. And what we've been thinking about so far is tidal range. That's what I've mainly been explaining to you. So the other side of it that affects us is a tidal flow. So we often think when we go to the beach, and if I go back to my other picture here, if we go back to this, people often think that the tide floods in and ebbs out, but actually the tide doesn't come in and go out. What happens is the water gets deeper and then it gets shallower. When you stand on the beach here, and this is on the north coast of Cornwall, so depending where you live, when the tide comes in, it actually is going, if I look at this one, from left to right. And when the tide is going out, it's going from right to left. It's just that the water gets deeper and shallower. So often people think that if the tide's coming in and you get in the water here, the tide will bring you up the beach. It doesn't work like that. People often think also when the tide's going out that the tide will take you out. Again, it doesn't work like that. The tide goes left to right. And that's a concept which is sometimes difficult to understand, but it's quite an important one. So if we have a look at this diagram of the English Channel and up into the Irish Channel, you can see that when the tide is coming in, it is going, and so remember, this is what we call a flood tide. The tide is coming up the north coast of Cornwall, up towards Bristol, and it splits off at Land's End, goes around the Lizard Point, and it goes up the English Channel this way. Now, the reason for that is quite difficult, I think, to get your head around, but in effect, we go back to our analogy of the Earth. Remember that the Earth is spinning, and as it spins, the bulk of water is moving around. So the water is not really moving, it's we're moving past it, but don't worry too much about that. The important concept is that if you're on the north coast of Cornwall and the tide's coming in, it is moving from left to right. If the tide's going out, it's going from right to left. And that can have a profound effect on us if we go out kayaking or paddleboarding or open water swimming, things like that. If we're on the south coast and we're on Lizard Point here, the incoming tide is going up that way, outgoing tide is going the other way. Okay, that means that when we get to things like headlands, this picture on the left is a group of people out kayaking. You can see it's a beautiful sunny day and really calm. But even on a sunny day like this, the tide doesn't really, even though there's no wind, there's still tide moving. So when we get to headlands, we can have quite a strong tide going around that headland, even though it's a nice calm day. And again, here's a picture on the right of kids out kayaking. I'm just going to flick back to the pictures that I took yesterday of the beach. If you were, this is quite choppy, but if it's a nice sunny calm day and you went out in your kayak out of this bay, around this corner there's massive big cliffs. So actually an outgoing tide would naturally take you that way. And so you can see that that actually could cause problems if you're out in the water. The other tidal movement, so that's tidal flow. That's the tide going around the coast. Now, the other type of tidal movement is tidal range, and that is how much the tide comes up and goes down. And we can see the effect of that on this picture on the left when the tide is in, and on the right when it is out. So the tidal range is the horizontal movement, the vertical movement up and down. So it is, and it's generally expressed in meters. So you could have a tidal range which is 4 meters, or you could have the diagram I showed you earlier in Wales. It could go up to 7.5 meters, and it can even go more than that. So that's how much it comes up and down. And the diagrams here show you the effect of that. So because we have a big tidal range, if we go along the coast and we find a nice little picnic spot around a headland and we hang out there and we don't maybe realize that the tide's coming in, that can, and often does, result in people getting cut off by the tide and then they can't get out. It's another picture here from, I think it's Dorset, of people getting cut off by the tide, because if the tide comes in, it can cut you off. Now this tidal movement that comes up and goes down, it doesn't come in, the tide doesn't come in and go out at an even speed. It actually changes speed all the way through the tide. And I've got something here that I'm going to show you to try and help to explain that. And we use what we call the rule of twelfths to understand this tidal movement. I'm going to try and do this without completely destroying my laptop as well. On the side of this bottle, you can see that I've marked 12 little marks on this bottle, okay? So if we said that the tidal range, this was the tidal range, for argument's sake, it's 6 meters. If we split that 6 meters into 12, which is half a meter for each bit, then this will help us to understand how fast the tide comes in. So in the first hour of tide, so if you can bear with me, let's imagine low tide is at 12 o'clock midday. By 1 o'clock, the tide will have come in 1/12 of the total amount that it's going to come in. But by 2 o'clock, it will come in twice as much. There's twice as much water comes in. So it will come in 2/12. I'm not very accurate. In the third hour, by 3 o'clock, we have 3 times as much water that comes in. So it will come in 3/12. So you can see that's a lot of water coming in, moving in now. By 4 o'clock, remember it takes just over 6 hours for the tide to go from low tide to high tide, it will come in another 3/12. And then the rate the tide comes in starts to slow down. So in the 5th hour, so between 4 and 5 o'clock, it will come in 2/12. And then in the last hour of the incoming tide, at 5 o'clock, it will only come in 1/12. And it is now high tide. And at 6 o'clock, or just after 6, the tide will start to go out. And it will do the same thing going out. If you imagine now the tide is going out, in the first hour, 1/12 will come out, only a little bit. In the second hour, 2/12 come out, twice as much. In the third hour, 3/12 will come out. Bit of guesstimation. Then 3/12, then 2/12, whoops, and then the last of the water comes out, and it's low tide again. So it actually takes just over 6 hours for the tide to come in, and just over 6 hours for the tide to go out. But it comes in and it gets faster, 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 and then it gets slow again, and then it turns. If we go back to this diagram we have on here, you can imagine that at low tide, the tide will start to come in. It'll come in slowly, then it'll get faster, 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 then slow down, slow down, slow down, stop. When the tide goes out, it will go out slowly. It'll get faster, 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 then slow down, then stop. And that's important because if you go, maybe you're rock pulling, maybe you're doing a beach clean, and you want to get into some areas that are a little bit inaccessible, the middle 2 hours of the tide is when they are flowing the fastest. And that tends to be when people are more likely to get cut off by the tide. It also means that around the headlands, that in the middle 2 hours of the tide, the water will be flowing the fastest past these headlands during those middle 2 hours. In terms of where we can find out information about tides, you can pick up a tide table And I know there's a lot of technology out there now, and with smartphones we can log on and we can just Google what's the tide. But online you can generally only find out the tide for the next 2 weeks. Whereas if you've got a tide table and you put it in your car, you put it in the bag that you take to the beach, you can look up the tide at any time. On the screen here, I have put a screenshot of the tide for today, and this is our local tide here. And you can see that it shows the low tide. It shows you the time, which is 3:41. It shows you the height, 0.8 meters. And then it shows you what time high tide is. So today, high tide is at 9:22. And you can see that is how high. So these numbers relate to the tidal range, how far it goes in and how far it goes out. And then low tide is at 4 o'clock, and then high tide tonight is at just after 9:30. So if you get a tide table, you can just look at the date, and then you can look at the information on there, and that will tell you what time the tide is. Now remember that when you pick up a tide table, it will be for a specific place, but because the tide goes round the coast, you may need to add or subtract the time depending on where you are. So for instance, this is for Falmouth. This is high water for Falmouth, but if you lived in Southampton, you would actually have to add some time onto this because the tide would be a little bit later on. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay. So what I've got now is a little quiz. If for those of you, I'm just going to end the show there a second. For those of you that have Kahoot on your phone or your mobile device, if you can load that up now. If you have downloaded Kahoot, but you've not used it before, I will show you on my phone. Kahoot has a little app on it here. We press on that app and it will come up, and then you just need to type in the number, and I'm going to show you the number on the screen. So. Okay, I'm just going to share the screen with you.
Hi, I'm Steve Bowens. I run H2O Training Limited. Probably are.
Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen with Kahoot on it? Yeah? Okay, great. So what you need to do is type in this number into here. So 3734667.
Surfing and teaching surfing and introducing kids and beginners into surfing.
Oh yeah, there's a few people arriving on there. That's great.
Beach lifeguard, surf lifeguard qualifications. So people who do them tend to want to work.
Oh, there's some great nicknames on here. Somebody's got 3 ducks. I love that. That's great. A few more people arriving in. And what we're going to do once we've got a lot of people logged in is we're going to have a little quiz. It's an online quiz, and what will happen is a question's going to come up, and then after that question you're going to have choices of what you think the correct answer is, and you just on your phone, all you have to do is press the color that you think is the right answer. Now they're timed, so they're quite quick. What I might do is I might read you out the potential answers. So when the answers come up, I'll say red is this, blue is this, green is this. Okay, we've got quite a lot of people on there now, so I think we're going to make a start. If you haven't got Kahoot, don't worry, you can do this at home just with pen and paper, just to see how you get on. There's a few more people still arriving. Okay. Is that everybody? Okay, great. So, our first question. What causes tide? Is it red, gravity from the sun and the moon? Yellow, evaporating water? Blue, strong offshore wind, or green, when the river fills the sea up? Oh, wow, everybody got that right. I'm amazed. That's really good. Well done, everybody. Okay. Now, because it's a little bit of a competition, the faster you answer the question, the more points you get. So Pluto is currently in the lead. So let's see how we get on to the next one. How long is there between high and low tide? Is it red, 6 hours, 6 minutes, yellow, 4 hours, 8 minutes, blue, 24 hours, or green, 12 hours, 12 minutes? There's some fast answers coming through here. Ooh, okay, lots of people got that right. A couple of people might have thought it was 12 hours, 12 minutes. There's a little bit of a trick question. If it was, if the question was, how long is it between high tide and high tide, those who answered green would have been right. But actually it was between high tide and low tide. Nearly a trick question. Pluto stays in the lead, well done. Closely followed by L, and then J, and then Jimbo, and then Emma. Well done, everybody. Okay, next question. True or false? An ebb tide is a tide going out. Blue is true, red is false. Wow, it's true. An ebb tide is the tide when it's going down. When the tide's coming in, it's a flood tide, which is the tide coming in. Okay, who's in the lead now? Pluto is on a roll. And Linny is on a streak, got 3 correct answers, that's great. Okay, next question. During which hours does the tide tend to move the fastest? Is it red, the first and second hour, blue, second and third, yellow, third and fourth, or green, fourth and fifth? Okay, so quite a tricky question, that one. The tide moves the fastest, both up and down and normally side to side, during the 3rd and 4th hour. Because if you remember, when the tide's coming in the 1st hour, it'll only come in 1/12, 2nd hour 2/12, 3rd and 4th hour, it moves in 3/12. So that's a massive amount of tide coming in. So it tends to be fastest during those hours. Okay, Pluto's still in the lead, doing well. Jay's in second. Lizzie's gone up 8 places, which is the biggest climber so far. Well done. Right, next question. What is a spring tide? Red is the lowest high tide and the highest low. Yellow is the highest high and the highest low. Blue is the lowest high and the highest low. Or green, the highest high and the lowest low. If you get this right, you're doing really well. I think everybody has answered now. Wow, 14 people got that right. That's good. It's quite a tricky question. So remember that a spring tide is when it comes in the most, so you have the highest high, and it goes out the most, so you have the lowest low. So spring tide is the highest high and the lowest low. Oh, Pluto's been knocked off the top spot, and Jay goes into the lead. Well done. Closely followed by SNR. Mart has gone up 6 places, so he's the highest climber in this one. Okay, what is a neap tide? Red, lowest high and the highest low. Yellow, the highest high and the lowest low. Blue, highest low and lowest high. Or green, highest high and the highest low. Okay, well done. It is the lowest high and the highest low, and I completely understand it's quite hard to get your head round. But a neap tide, remember the tide doesn't come in as much and it doesn't go out as much. So it doesn't come in as much, so it's the lowest high, and it doesn't go out as much, so it is the highest of the low tide. Jay remains in the lead, well done. Bex has gone up 5 places. Next question. Tidal flow is how far the tide comes up the beach. True or false? Okay, so tidal flow is the flow of the water around the coast, remember, around headlands. So it doesn't describe tidal range is how far it comes up and down the beach. It's quite a tricky question, that one. Okay, Jay is in the lead, closely followed by Lizzie, and Elle has had 3 in the row right. Well done. Okay, we're on to the last 2 questions. What does the rule of 12ths tell us about tidal movement? Red, it takes 12 hours for the tide to drop. Yellow, the 3rd and 4th hours are the fastest tide. Blue, it takes 12 hours for the tide to come in. And green, there are 12 tides each day. Wow, okay, well done. Lots of people got that one right. So the rule of 12 tells us that the most amount of water moves in the middle 2 hours, the 3rd and the 4th hour. Okay, so Jay's got 8 answers right in a row, which is really good. Last question, what is tidal range? Red is the speed of water on the coast. Yellow, the height of the tide at high tide. Blue, the number of tides a day. And green, the vertical distance from low to high tide. Last question, who's going to be the winner of this? Oh, lots of people got that right. The vertical distance from low to high. Tidal range is the tide coming up and going down. Right, who's going to be on the podium? Lou, you came 3rd, well done. 2nd place, Lizzie. 1st place overall. Okay, well done, excellent. Okay, well done. So, I hope you found that useful, and I hope that it helped to consolidate some of the things we're doing. Final slide just to run through is how to stay safe. So in terms of getting cut off by the tide, the RNLI have an amazing campaign called Respect the Water. It's all about having the number of drownings around the UK coast. And basically they suggest that before you head out, check the tide times. When you're out, be aware of your surroundings and the tide's direction. And if you get cut off, don't enter the water, call 999 and ask for the Coast Guard. If I click on this, it takes me to the RNLI website. I think I might have to share that with you. Just here, okay. And if you go on the RNLI website, there's lots of information there about tides, about how to check for tides, what the information means, and all the rest of it. So I'm just going to close that down. So that is the end of the presentation. Let me just put this down. And I see there's a few chat comments coming through, so I'm just going to have a look and see what they are. Okay. Oops. Okay, first question from Adele. Is the tidal flow direction the same for every beach? No, it's not. It's a really good question. So it depends where you are. If we, obviously I'm based in the southwest, so I tend to think about that. But if you're on the north coast of Cornwall, an incoming tide will go from left to right. But if you're on the south coast, it will go from right to left as you look out at the sea. So basically the tide, as it's coming in, will come, if you can imagine, from the southwest. The water splits around Land's End. It goes up the Irish Channel, along the English Channel, and it goes up that way. And when it comes out, it goes the other way around. Next question from Libby. Really interested to see Brighton's tidal flow is different and opposite to other side of the Isle of Wight. Yeah, and actually you have a really unique tidal situation in Southampton Water, where you have a double high, so you have 4 high tides and only 2 low tides. And that's to do with the fact that the tide gets bounced around, partly to do, I believe, with the Isle of Wight, but that's quite unique. And remember, when we're talking about things like the rule of twelfths, it's a concept, it's not an exact science. So the tides are different at the local places you go to. And the best thing to do, if you're going down to the beach, the lifeguards are on the beach, and you're going to go rock pulling, or you're going to go out on your paddleboard, whatever, speak to the lifeguard, because they will know exactly what the tides are doing in that area. Okay, another question. Oh, there's just a bit of chat going on. That's good. Some other people are answering here. Okay, I think that's all of the questions, just some comments in here. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and listening. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it informative. If you've got any feedback, you can send it through to the guys at the Your Shore Beach Project. Oh, there's one. Where can I get tide tables from? These tide tables, you can pick them up in like fish and tackle shop, or at the news agent at the, in the village here sell them, or you can buy them online. So you can get them lots of different places, chandleries, boat shop, things like that. So thank you very much, folks. I'm gonna end it there now. I've got another session running next week, which is all about waves and rips. If you enjoyed it, then let other people know. I believe this recording is going to be shared on the Your Shore Beach Rangers Facebook page, so you can share it with other people if they'd like to. I know next week's full as well. I'm going to be chatting to Brenda and Jen about maybe putting some more sessions on, so that you don't, you're not going to miss out. If any of you are interested in doing some beach lifeguard training, I'm doing some online courses at the minute, covering all the theory for the lifeguard course when we're back, so that when we're back in the water, we can just crack straight on with it. So you can get in touch if you're interested in that. Thanks very much, everybody. Stay safe. I hope you enjoy getting down to the beach whenever we're allowed back on again. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.